Hey guys, welcome back. This is going to be the last episode for this podcast in 2022. So I thought I would detour a little bit and tell you about some of the lessons that I've learned from this podcast this year. The first one is probably a surprise to no one, but I still hate solo episodes. They are still the bane of my existence. I still hate planning them. I still hate recording them. When I listen to other people's episodes that have really great solo content, I'm like, I wish I could be more like them. But maybe that is just not what this podcast is meant to be. In 2022, I published 33 episodes on the podcast, and only 12 of them were solo. This is a definite deviation from what I originally planned when the podcast launched. I originally thought that each month I would bring you 2 solo episodes and 2 guest episodes. And then I moved into 1 solo episode and 3 guest episodes. And that's actually what I've continued to plan going into 2023. I just love having conversations with fellow entrepreneurs. And because I find it so inspiring for myself, I find it easier to plan. I find it easier to have the discussions. Like those podcast episodes are just more enjoyable for me. And I'm going to talk about a few of my favorites at the end of this podcast. The second lesson that I've learned is that content creation is very different for me now than it was before I started the podcast. If you follow me on Instagram, you've probably noticed this definite content shift on my feed in particular, because I would gather that 90% of what I'm currently sharing on my Instagram feed is repurposed from this podcast. Now, I'm repurposing the podcast content as quote cards, as short, less than 60-second videos. But what that means is that if you look at my feed right now, it is filled with other people. I mean, I'm in the videos. I'm the one asking the questions. But I feel like my Instagram feed has made a definite shift from originally I posted a lot of photography content, client content. And then when I shifted over to my systems, I was posting a lot of content about doing your systems yourself, hiring me for Dubsado, considering what CRM you needed, elevating your client experience. And I feel like now it has kind of migrated into a place where I talk about the podcast guests, and the insights that they've offered way more than I am actually posting what I would consider to be solo content. I don't know yet how that's affecting my overall marketing. I think I'm going to have a conversation with you guys on the podcast about this in 2023. The third lesson that I learned, and it's really just a shout out. Hiring a podcast strategist is 100% what pushed me to finally launch this podcast. Guys, I have wanted a podcast for 2 years. For 2 years, it was an idea. I thought about what I would name it. I thought about who I would invite onto the podcast, what kind of questions they would ask. And then I had my VIP day with Jocelyn of Connect Through Content. That was amazing. And she is 100% the reason that I finally launched the podcast. I know she was a little surprised during the VIP day when I was like, well, no, how quickly can I launch this? And she's like, most people want to work through it, record your intro, outro, plan out your episodes. She's like, 6 to 8 weeks is a good mark. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm trying to launch this by the end of the month. I still don't think she believed me when I said I was going to do that. But literally 21 days later, this podcast launched on Apple Podcasts. So I am super proud of myself for finally getting this done. And I am super grateful for Jocelyn for all of her amazing content strategy ideas and finally pushing me to actually hit publish on the podcast. Okay, so now that I've told you about the 3 general lessons that I learned from my podcast in 2022, I want to get just a little bit more specific. And the way that I'm going to do this is share the top 3 downloaded episodes of the year. Maybe you have an idea of what they are. I'm going to go ahead and ruin the surprise and say none of them were solo episodes. I mean, that just might be a reason that I can do less solo episodes in 2023. My very first episode of the podcast was the 4th most downloaded episode. So, I mean, it just missed the top 3, but it's pretty clear when I look at the download trends that you guys are enjoying the guest content. All right, guys, are you ready? The most downloaded episode of 2022 was Let's Talk Growth Strategy with Colie James. The action that I took right after we stopped recording was to put data back at the top of my to-do list. In that episode, we talked a lot about how I looked at data when I first started my photography business, and I admitted openly that I hadn't been doing very much of that since I had shifted the main focus of my business from photography into system strategy. So for 2023, that is actually at the top of my list for my goals for my business, is to track more data, specifically related to conversions, but also related to podcast downloads and some other cool things that I'm going to chat about with you later. But for 2023, making those data-driven decisions is going to be where it's at for me. The second most downloaded episode was Crafting Copy That Converts with Rachel Griman. That is honestly one of my favorite episodes that I recorded in 2022. And I think it's because my only goal with getting on the podcast with Rachel was just to chat. I mean, I think that every time she answers a question, every time she gives insight into her own business, I have an aha moment. But the one thing that I walked away with Rachel is something that I know in the back of my mind, and I know that most of you probably know this too, but we tend to forget it when we're in the trenches. And so that is, no matter how far down we niche our services or how much we raise our prices, there are still plenty of clients. Now, this kind of goes back to episode number 1, which again, didn't hit the top 3. But in that episode, I'm telling you that if you keep on hearing no about your services, it's probably not your pricing. And these are all of the other things that I want you to look at. So that's what I took away from my episode with Rachel. And last, but certainly not least, the third most downloaded episode of 2022 was Pick Your Path with Ashley Pendergraft. Now, I find her entire story of 2022 to be super fascinating. But the main takeaway for the listening audience is that it's okay to put yourself first in your business. You don't have to make decisions or continue to offer services because your current clients expect them. It's okay to disappoint them. I have a lot more to say about the lessons that I got in particular from Ashley, but I'm going to save those for another episode in 2023. It's already planned. It's already scheduled. So guys, if you haven't listened to those top 3 downloaded episodes that I just mentioned, I'm going to link them in the show notes. Give them a listen, and I can't wait to share new podcast episodes with you in 2023. Before I close out this episode, I just want to say thank you so much for going on this journey with me. Thank you for subscribing to the podcast. Thank you for downloading the episodes, and I hope to see you soon.